So we start off with our usual prayer. Please join with me. Om Sahanaha Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is Spiritual Seekers Question Answers. If you have no questions, there are no answers. So as usual, I'll mute the microphone while you formulate your questions. Well, since there are no questions, I'll ask you a question. So, because it's a common question that most people will ask at some point of time. And it would be something along the lines as we have so much work to do, and that we don't seem to have time for any spiritual practice. So spiritual disciplines seem to be on one side, and work and activity seem to be on the other side. How can we reconcile these two things? Now, this was a question that was asked to Swami Purnananda, and I'm quoting from a book here, A Guide to Spiritual Life, Spiritual Teachings of Swami Purnananda. It is collected by Swami Chetananda, who is famous for other books such as God Lived With Them, They Lived With God, and The Life of Girish Chandra Ghosh, and so on. So essentially, it comes under a heading here. And it was a conversation that is there in Varanasi. It took place on 12th of February, 1921. So what does Swami Brahmananda answer? He answers like this. It's a mistake to think that you don't have any time for meditation because of the pressure of work. Well, why would he say that it's a mistake? It's because if we have a certain attitude toward all activities, including work, that is philosophically based, you see that all activities are manifested energy. What kind of energy? We have to trace it back to divine energy. So what we call karma yoga, that is enriched with bhakti, doing all work for the sake of the Lord as a dedication, with that kind of sweetness, then a number of things happen. First of all, this question that is being asked will not arise. The second thing is that the internal arrangement around all work and activities will shift and change, become positive, and have its positive effect on the human body, on its physiology, and the mind as well. So he continues. The real cause is restlessness of the mind. That's the real cause. In other words, if I'm doing an activity and I'd rather be doing something else, something is pleasant or unpleasant, we categorize these things. For example, supposing you have set up a business and you have aspirations to make some money, make a kind of organization, and you may be involved in mundane activities, what people classify as mundane activities. You have to make out invoices, you have to make out packaging lists, all kinds of things. And then you say, well, this is detracting from the central purpose, and I never thought that my business life would be like this. This is called restlessness of the mind, that we cannot concentrate on one unit activity at a time. So the normal standard thing that I ask people, how many activities do you have to do today? They give me a whole list. Let's say it's about 20 different activities. But it's a catch question because, no, only one activity, and then another one, and then another one. You only have to do one thing. Do it well. Put all your energy into it, and do it as a kind of joyful dance. What will happen then? You'll have a positive attitude. Positive attitude means every single cell of the body will thrill with a certain joy, a certain rejoicing that you did something well. Not only that, but there's a sweetness attached to it because you register all the energy to its divine source. This is a kind of meditation, isn't it? Isn't this meditation with your eyes open? Anyway, he continues, work and worship must go hand in hand. The two sides of the same coin, they're not separate things. After all, what is involved in worship? Let's take worship in a kind of formal sense. Let's take a simple kind of worship. You light a lamp. You light some incense stick. You maybe wave it a little bit. Maybe you do a little sandhya, offer a little water, offer some flowers or something. Offer something that was cooked. Something simple. Are these not activities? When you're in the office and you turn your computer on, is this also not an activity? What's the difference? The difference is only in the way you valued it. One you put in and made it a spiritual activity. The other one, you made it a dividing line. Because your mind was somewhere else. Your mind was not on the divine. If you bring the divine in and practice the presence as you're doing all your activities, this question doesn't arise, this division doesn't arise. It's very good if one can devote oneself fully to spiritual practices. Yes, ideally you can do that. But how many can do so? Two types of persons can live in this world adopting the Python method. Now in Africa, you'll come across pythons. In India also, you come across pythons. That is, they just laze around, actually. The Python method is just to sit and enjoy the sunshine, like that. So Python method means sitting in one place and doing nothing, not even striving for food. And some people do this as a meditation method, completely wrong. What is meditation? It's keeping the mind blank, emptying the mind. I've heard people say, oh, I can't do meditation. Why? I can't empty my mind. Who told you you should empty your mind? You think your mind is a garbage can? People deposit things in there and you have to empty it. No, it's not like that at all. Two of the biggest mistakes connected with meditation and its practice would be making the mind blank, keeping a kind of dullness there. That would be falling asleep. It's good for insomnia, not good for realization or purification. Then the other great difficulty would be focusing the mind, stunning the mind with one thought. This will not be meditation at all. This will have the same effect as well, dulling the mind. So, this Python method, sitting in one place, doing nothing, not even striving for food, people think of that as an ideal. But the two types of people would adopt this method. One is the idiot who is too dull to be active. And the other is the realized saint, the saint who has gone beyond all activity. So which one are you? Are you the dullard or are you the saint? Chances are you'll tell me in all honesty, well, I'm just an ordinary person. I just try to be good. That's it. That's all it is. The Bhagavad Gita says, without performing action, none can attain the actionless state. One can attain knowledge through the path of action. And all of us are dedicated to action in some way or another. So as we've noticed, even those who give up work, Swami Purnananda continues, and lead a retired life have to spend a great deal of their time in putting up thatches on their roofs, cooking food, doing other things. But work for the Lord. If you work with the idea that you work for your ideals, that is, for those who have inspired you. In the case of Swami Brahmananda, it would have been the Master Ramakrishna and Swamiji, meaning Swami Vivekananda. The work will not bind you because it's in the context of these two personalities. Every action binds you. Karma binds you. Why should it bind you? Because it is there with a result in mind. And a result in mind involves the anxiety of peeping, looking out the window. Has it arrived yet? Did it come yet? Or doing an activity and you'd rather be doing something else. Supposing you're a wonderful golfer, and you are, supposing you're a golfer and you're doing some work, and it occurs to you, yes, I'm doing this work, but actually I'd rather be golfing. Then you'll get tired, because theoretically nothing can disturb thought or the mind. The mind doesn't deplete any energy. The mind is beyond what you think is your individual broadcasting station. There's a universal aspect to it. So all work is binding. Give yourself up wholly. Here I am. Pray to these entities, whatever form of the divine you have, and say, here I am, offering my body and mind to you. Please use them in whatever way you see fit. In other words, shift away from the sense of individuality, I'm doing something, and see the instrumentality of who you are and what you're doing. I'm ready to serve you to the best of my ability. Then they will take responsibility for you. What does that mean? Well, supposing you have a powerful connection in the government, and you're trying to do some little thing at a local level, and you use your leverage and go to the person who's in charge of the whole works in the area, then he then commands a whole work crew to come and solve this problem, come and solve that problem. Before, you would have gone to the council offices and made your small petition. As soon as you go to the head man, he's now in charge. He sends everybody out and does the work. It happens automatically. So your part in it is very small. So if you are appealing to the Lord of the universe that spins the whole galaxies, won't that Lord do a little thing for you? Don't think that you're doing it. It's not your energy. The instrumentality mentality will say, I am not this body and I'm not the mind. I'm not the combination of the two. I'm not a personality with a history, or even a history beyond this birth in a previous incarnation. None of that. What has arrived here is the instrument of the infinite invisible, and I'm happy to relax into that and allow that grace to flow through. And that is what does everything for me. The next thing is, will I recognize it? And then will I be thankful for it? So you get the others to take the responsibility. I'm not responsible for this. Lord, you do it. Like taking a telephone call. Lord, it's for you. But you must resign yourself in the right spirit, says Swami Purnananda. It will be hypocrisy if you chant the Lord's name and lift up your cloth at the same time. This is a reference to a story. I'll read the story. The story is a story of a milkmaid who had to cross a river to deliver milk to a certain pundit or a priest. And she was often late due to an unreliable boatman. And so when she was late, the priest used to scold her, saying, men cross the ocean of existence by the name of God. He has no idea what he's saying. Just saying it because he read it somewhere and because he wants to exhibit his superiority in knowledge. Just quoting scripture. Can you not cross this little river by the same means? He's telling the milkmaid, not understanding just the difficulty of missing the boat because the boatman doesn't come on time. And no matter how much you wish that you'd come on time, you're reliant on somebody else. So the lack of human understanding, he puts in a so-called higher or superior solution. And from the next day, she, who was a simple milkmaid, not learned in all these things, taking what this man said to be absolutely true. From the next day, she was never again late. And one day, she explained, because he's asking, okay, you were late, and the boatman was not on time, I can see that. How did you cross the river? Well, since I crossed the river as advised by you, by uttering the name of the Lord, in this case saying, Hari, Hari, I do not need a boatman, isn't it? Just by chanting God's name, I can cross the river. And the priest wanted to see for himself because he didn't believe it. His own advice he couldn't believe. And so the woman told him to follow her, and she began to walk over the water, chanting the name of God, Hari, Hari, Hari. And there she walked on the water. And the priest tried to follow her. He was hesitant. She said, come, come, come. You also can do it. Now that the roles have changed. Instead of being a father-like figure, he becomes something like a child, and she becomes something like a mother. Come on, you can do it. Encouraging him. And as he treads, he's just got a new dhoti on. He lifts his dhoti up because it's going to get wet and doubtful. And as the priest tried to follow her, he didn't make it. He sank. So the woman told him, you see, you're uttering the name of God, but at the same time, you're taking care to save your cloth from getting wet. Not only does he not believe in his own words, but his whole attention, instead of being on God's name or God and God's name will be the same thing. If I call you by your name, you'll turn around and say, yes, can I help you? Something like that. In that same way, if you call upon God, will he not attend to you? But there has to be some feeling in it, some conviction in it. In other words, if I call you, it's because I know you're there. If I think you're not there and still call you, I won't expect you to respond. He's thinking, I call on God, but he's not there. So where will my attention be? It will be scattered along all the things that I feel are important, such as my new cloth will get wet. With all that attention, he sinks. So she says, you are not fully relying on the Lord. She then becomes the teacher, you see, like that. So that's the story that's being referred to. Then he goes on to say like this. He says, we led a wandering life for 5 or 6 years and then became involved in the Master's work. See, Swami Purnananda was the first president of the Ramakrishna Mutton Mission, doing tremendous work for the upliftment of humanity. But prior to that, what was he doing? For 5 or 6 years, wandering life, going here and there, as is the natural wont of a sadhu, relying entirely on the divine. The divine will provide food. I want to ask for food. It will provide that, provide shelter. And as long as I can attune my mind in to the divine, that's all that has to happen. But now, is that the complete thing? Or should all that spiritual practice not erupt and overflow into a spirit of service for mankind? Should I not expand my heart and be compassionate for everybody? Then he says, one day Swamiji, that means Swami Vivekananda, said to me, look, there is nothing in a wandering life. Work for the sake of the Lord. After that, we did various kinds of work, and I don't think it did us any harm. He says very mildly. It didn't do our spiritual life any harm. We wasn't making a dent in it because we weren't sitting, meditating the whole day. You see, up until Swami Vivekananda, the idea was a monk should lead a wandering life with this one aim in mind, and that is complete freedom, moksha. But is it not selfish when people around you are suffering? In the ancient days, it wasn't like that. In the ancient days, the social structure was such that the administrative saints, that is the kings, had their bounden duty to support society. And there were very clear definitions of occupation. Vast majority of people were wealth earners, involved in industry and commerce and agriculture. And then there were the Brahmins who were dedicated to prayer and welfare of humanity. And then the kings or the royalty or the administrators who were responsible for protecting that and keeping society with its citizenship on track with this dharma in mind, that is making a harmonious society for the good of everybody. It wasn't the job of the sadhus to do this. But in this modern society, when all that social structure is disrupted, how can you stand by and see God in a certain form, suffering, with no food, in rags, no education, impoverished? So we had tremendous faith in Swamiji's words, he says. So have firm faith in the words of the Master and the Swamiji and work for their cause. Now, what does that mean? It means then that in all the things that we do, whether it's studying, or whether it is working, whether it's our own business, or whether it is dedicated in some way, all work is useful work. But you see, it doesn't have to be that way. It depends on your mindset. You can be working, no doubt, for selfish reasons. But when you shift things and make it worship, when work becomes worship, there's an added value that comes, not only for you, but for everybody. You now fit in well. Like a jigsaw puzzle. If one piece is missing, the whole thing is not complete. We all have a role to fulfill that nobody else can fulfill. We all have certain skills and talents and abilities nobody else has. So we have to use them. And there is nothing to be afraid of, continues Swami Purnananda. Some may try to confuse you, saying, the work you have undertaken has nothing to do with the original ideals. He doesn't put it like that. He says, nothing to do with Sri Ramakrishna or Swamiji. That's what they're saying that's what people are saying about this newly formed monastic order that is sweeping the streets in the early days, that is coming down from the honor due sadhus and coming and mixing with people, coming to their level, being human, serving humanity in a human way with a divine aspiration and insight. Lord, you are there. Lord, you are there. So he's saying, don't listen to these people. Even if the whole world stands against you, never give up what you believe to be true. Now, this conversation, actually, the original conversation was with a disciple that we assume is a householder, but now a monk asks a question or makes a statement. He says, it is extremely difficult to devote oneself exclusively to spiritual practices. I tried but could not continue for very long. And Swami Brahmananda replies, why do you think that you cannot do it just because you failed 3 or 4 times? One has to try again and again. We have to have this persistence. We can't give up. We have to pick ourselves up and move on all the time, assessing our status quo all the time. What condition is the mind in at any given moment? And then make the corrective action. Not looking at the past. Don't ask why. Why is a past question? Why not what next? And continue. The master used to say, says Swami Brahmananda, when a newborn calf tries to stand, it falls 100 times, but it never gives up. At last it learns to run. The mind gets good training if one takes up regular work at the beginning of spiritual life. Then that disciplined mind can be engaged in meditation. If the mind is allowed to drift, it will drift at the time of meditation also. How to meditate? Make sure that all your waking life is completely full of spiritual aspirations, is directed completely towards spirituality. In other words, all of work can be spiritually orientated. All of work can be joyful and delightful. There comes a time when an aspirant wants to devote himself solely to meditation and prayer. Now, this daily life and daily routine, there's a phrase that encapsulates the spirit of it, practicing the presence of the divine. And so a foundation book that I give everybody when they start is, please read Practicing the Presence by Brother Lawrence. A small book. The 17th or 18th century coachman who went through a number of difficult problems and decided, I'm going to solve this by entering into a monastery. So he joined a monastery. After so many years, he only had one complaint. I went into this monastery with the idea that I would get some difficulties, that things would be unpleasant for me, that I could do some tapasya, that I will severely reprimand myself, you know the proverbial scourging of the back and things like that. And he said, what is my disappointment? None of that happened. I felt every moment is a joyous moment. Every moment is a delight. And what did he do? Well, sometimes he was cleaning the floor, sometimes he was cooking, sometimes he was answering the door. Routine activities. That's all. But what is the difference? He continuously felt the presence of this infinite, invisible, this God of love that is investing energy in him and giving him resources around just to play this dance of love. That's all. And so at that time, that is the time when all you want to do is meditate in prayer, because your whole life becomes one continuous stillness of prayer. At that time, work falls off from that person by itself. At that time, by itself, you don't have to make it a discipline. It's a natural thing that happens, because the mind then becomes absorbed away from these activities. This happens, he says, when the mind has become spiritually awakened. Otherwise, if one forcibly devotes oneself exclusively to spiritual practices, after a few days, monotony comes. You'll get bored, and you'll give it up more than likely. Then he continues. Some who have tried to do this have even gone out of their minds, because it's all to do with suppression. And the worst thing you can do in any psychological technique is repress things, push them down. Others, he says, practices their disciplines superficially and meanwhile keep their minds busy with other things. There's a kind of hypocrisy like that, thinking I'm doing my duty and keeping up the surface, but underneath there's still this busyness with other things. Then he goes on to say, brahmacharya generates tremendous power. Now this brahmacharya is a fundamental aspect of moral training. In Patanjali Yoga Sutras, 5 aspects of moral training are there, and brahmacharya is one of them. Non-injury, truthfulness, the cultivation of non-stealing, so like that, continence, and operating in an independent way, non-receiving of gifts is how it's sometimes translated. So what is this self-control that's called brahmacharya? The word brahmacharya applies to a certain state of life, in some sense, that is to do with studentship. And unless the self-control occurs at the student level, good citizenship will be impossible. So we have to learn to control the senses in such a way that all the energy is not wasted. Brahmacharya is not continence. It is chastity, purity of mind. And it generates tremendous power, he says. A true brahmacharin can do the work of 25 men. We have a certain amount of energy that arrives at the psychophysical station, and how we use it is important. Don't waste it. In the old days, besides the practice of continence, brahmacharya also included japam, meditation, study of scriptures, pilgrimage, and having holy company. Let's have a look at this. So, japam, what is that? Delightful repetition of the holy name of your chosen ideal, lovingly repeated, just as when you are in love, automatically the mind is repeating the name of the beloved. Meditation, tuning the mind constantly into the divine. Study of scriptures, being inspired by the principles and lives and examples of those people who were free, who attained the freedom, and also knew the formula. They had the manual of the process and gives it to us. Pilgrimage from time to time, isn't it inspiring to go to a holy place? Every religion has a tradition of pilgrimages. Even here in Ireland, there is Knock, where hundreds and thousands of people go on pilgrimage, where originally there was a revelation, an apparition of the Virgin Mary amongst the Roman Catholics in Ireland. And throughout the world, we have these places of pilgrimage, whether it's in Hinduism in India, whether it is the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, or whether it is in the Christian tradition throughout Europe and South America and various other places. All people do not know what is good for them. Holy company is one which is also mentioned. What is holy company? Of course, if you're purifying the mind and practicing the divine presence and continuously have your mantra, your protecting thought in mind all the time, this is holy company. But holy company can be put in a different sense. Supposing you have a home, supposing you make the heart of that home a shrine, supposing you install the living presence of the deity in that shrine, is that holy company when you visit? Yes. Now, supposing there are many people who are holy, nuns, monks, other people, householders also, people who have attained a certain level of spiritual realization and purity of mind, those who have access to a level of wisdom, should you not rub off against them? Should you not get their vibrations? Should you not live in their holy presence as much as possible? See, my own guru, Swami Purnananda, was a very quiet man. People went and sat at his feet, and there was whole atmosphere was characterized by silence. He didn't say much. I remember going to a particular satsang at the Divine Life Society in Rishikesh on my last visit to India. And I met with the president there because I was familiar with the second president, Swami Chidananda, who was a great friend of mine. And introducing myself, he said, 11 o'clock, we all assemble in the hall. And there were people from all over the world there. And I went in with the other devotees and sat at the back. He called me, no, come, sit by me, please. Then I realized he wasn't really a speaking man. He had to speak for an hour, from 11 o'clock to 12, maybe more, an hour and a half. And his eye caught a musician, some devotee, I think he was from Argentina or something. Anyway, he said, come on, play something. Oh, I haven't got a harmonium, I haven't got drums, I haven't got, hey, come on, bring a harmonium here. So after a short time, they had all the instruments and no excuses, and they sang. And I understood he didn't want to speak. So the easy option, these people can do it, you see. Let them do some performance. Then ultimately he turned to me and said, he is going to speak to you. I said, no, this is your, I didn't put it in this language, but I said, this is your show, you have to speak, So the point is, you see, people go not for entertainment to these people and places, not necessarily for performance, but they go just to wallow in the holy radiance and company of those that they're sitting in. Finished. You get the brilliance, the sun rays of these personalities. Let's take the reverse of it. Supposing you decide that you will keep unholy company, won't you be influenced by that? People who are speaking all kinds of things, people who are interested in worldliness, won't their worldliness rub off on you? It will. Saintliness, won't holiness rub off on you? It will. So he mentions these various things. Then he says, all people do not know what is good for them. For that reason, one should keep the company of one's guru and holy people. He says, If I were to give you freedom to practice sadhana, spiritual practice, on a full-time basis, how long could you keep it up? Not long, not even a few days, because our inclination, our pull from the unconscious mind, our habit level will still be there. It has to be tamed. You would have trouble because your mind has not yet been properly trained, he says. Then he says, there's no enemy more harmful than idle gossip. He highlights that. Sometimes people come here to the ashram and loudly they talk about all kinds of things, idle gossip, thinking that this is just an ordinary place. This is a place dedicated to spiritual thought and practice and holy company. Don't come here for gossip. Gossip is the most disastrous thing and the most harmful thing. And people get a kind of satisfaction from it. Anyway, Swami Brahmananda continues, it completely ruins a person. Unless one spends some time in solitude, one cannot understand the workings of the mind and grasp the truth. It's hard to grow spiritually in the midst of a hectic life. That doesn't mean to say a life devoid of people. You can be going down one of the busiest pedestrian streets in Dublin, namely Grafton Street, and there you can catch the divine there in every footstep, in every breath a person is breathing, in the colors and the names and the forms which are there, in the various activities. You can catch it and be mesmerized by it, on the one hand. On the other hand, you can see divine energy flowing through all these hands and heads and arms. And catch the same joy, catch a kind of infectious joy of joyful activity. After all, people strolling down an avenue are inherently doing it for leisure and for an element of pleasure and joy. Is there any place better than the Himalayas? He then goes on to say. And there's a footnote here. Maharaj mentioned the Himalayas because that monk was going to Mayavati Himalayas as the editor of the Prabhupada. For this reason, Mayavati is the foothills of the Himalayas, and you can see the greater mountains from there. And because he's going there, he says, is there any greater place? But we could equally say, oh, I'm moving to Cork or London or somewhere there. Or is there any greater place than that? You could say, not with quite the same conviction, because naturally the Himalayas are a sacred place, inspiring. When you see them, immediately the spirit soars. But can we catch these, whatever environment we're in, can we not mentally at least transform it into an opportunity, into a victory? Then he goes on, the Himalayas, yes, it's so quiet, serene, and holy. It is the abode of Lord Shiva. Now we have to explain that. Supposing you sit there and are inspired by these great mountains. Supposing you look at the mountains and see they are solid, they give strength, they are beautiful. And then all of a sudden you think that it represents some qualities of auspiciousness, of meditation, of quietude, of sanctity. And then you realize that from the top, from a glacier, will come the beginnings of a river that flows down and goes on to the plains. And with a certain poetic imagination, you can see the sides, the snow-capped peaks. You can see maybe some hair. You can see a serene face, planted, settled, full of peace. You can see the blueness which is there. You can see all the wild forest animals that surround the foothills of these mountains. Now you're constructing an image of auspiciousness. And so it's quite possible that the image of Lord Shiva in meditation gets constructed by these great rishis, observing these wonderful mountains. Of all the hills, of all the mountains throughout the world, I am the Himalayas, declares Krishna. The cold climate of the Himalayas keeps the brain calm, he goes on, and one can accomplish 4 hours' work in 1 hour. I give freedom to all. I let everyone move forward according to his own way. But when I see that someone is not able to do so, then I go to his aid. It is good in every way, he continues, to remain in one particular center and take up some work of the Master and Swami. He's talking to a monastic member now. So 2 things he's talking. One is the opportunity to sit in solitude in a serene environment. And we all have this opportunity. How so? We are not necessarily sitting in the Himalayas, although we can go on pilgrimage from time to time. But in the early morning, there's an atmosphere of silence and quietude. Before the sun rises, there's an anticipation of the dawn. And in the liturgical Christianity, this is called matins, mornings, the morning, followed by lauds, praise when the sun is rising. A kind of mood that we can catch and take advantage of. So we can do the same thing and not give up work. We can still engage in work and work as service. And he's saying this to a monk. But it's equally applicable to every single person. Then he goes on encouraging like that. And the last paragraph of his conversation goes like this. Control the mind. Instead of indulging in inertia, laziness, I'm adding, learn to stop the thought waves of the mind. How do we stop the thought waves of the mind? Not by stopping them, but we stop the thought waves of the mind that are deleterious to us by introducing counter waves of joy and strength and beauty and goodness and love and harmony. Put that in. We don't have any evil in this world. We have opportunities for asserting victories. As soon as we put these values in, all the evil goes away. Meditation, he goes on, and japam will automatically help to restrain the senses. Automatically. You don't have to ask how to do it. There's the formula. Meditation and japam. But in the beginning, you must make an extra effort to control them. In the beginning, no doubt. The power to practice meditation for a long time in one sitting comes gradually. That means, please be patient. See the humanity, the understanding. Look, I understand it's difficult in the beginning, but persist, please. In the beginning, it's good to practice meditation 4 to 5 times a day. Whether your mind likes it or not, repeat your mantra. My teacher was asked, how many times should we do it? He said, 24 hours of the day. The habit of sitting like this will definitely curb the restlessness of the mind. That serene state may come at any time, provided you continue your disciplines, even if you don't like them. And when the kundalini rises, that is, this coiled potential arises in you, this progressive revelation comes to you, the senses become powerless. Then one is not even aware of their existence. So I need to explain a few things here. Okay. So, you see, 4 or 5 times a day, well, how many times do we eat? 3 times a day, plus snacks, I don't tea time, let's say 4. If you can remember to think of God before you eat, what a wonderful thing that is. At least that minimum can be there. Now, I mentioned matins and lauds, and every period of the day has a certain mood. So let us say that we can do this twice in the morning. We can do this at midday, that is 3 times already, and in the evening 4 times. And then just before you go to bed, 5 times. We're not talking about any duration. Some people ask, how long should I meditate? I sit down, I can't do more than 3 minutes. That's a big problem for me. Never mind. You see, when you truly meditate, you don't really have any idea of what the time is. Concentration, by definition, means the absence of the awareness of time. You know, you've heard the phrase, oh, where did the time go to? If you're occupied with something, you won't have any sense of time. So there are opportunities to frequently tune the mind in to the highest principle of the universe, to our own divine self that religion calls God. And we can do that systematically, so that automatically we're thinking of this true entity that sits as a substructure underneath you, as it were, and expresses itself in, through, and as the world. And that would be not only achieving, as it were, the purpose of life, but it will also alleviate all our stress, all our anxiety, and it will serve to neutralize the deleterious waves in the mind and control every single wave in the mind until, at last, the mind no longer presents an obscuring veil where we cannot see the truth that sits beneath it. So all of our activity, karma yoga, whatever we do, is there to purify the mind, to still and calm these waves, so that we can get a clarified vision of what sits underneath. So we are now at 10 to 8. If there are no other questions, I will finish off early today. Good. I think you're all enlightened then, is it? No questions whatsoever. All right, good. So we'll leave it at that then. I think there's a lot for you to reflect on. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Karma, good Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.